Gina Cass-Gottlieb has been chair of the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, the ACCC, for 4 years, with a year left on her term. All of her predecessors had a second term, so she'll probably do the same. In fact, she told me she's up for it anyway. Now, the ACCC chairs are always high profile because there's so much always going on for them. But I do get the feeling that Cass-Gottlieb is perhaps not quite as spotlight hungry as her predecessors. So I thought a decent interview with her was in order. And there's so much to talk about. Supermarkets, petrol pricing, digital platforms, AI now, and also, of course, Australia's culture of oligopolies in general. We cover it all. So here's Gina Cass-Gottlieb, chair of the ACCC. Well, hello, Gina Cass-Gottlieb. It's great to have you on That's Business.
It's great to be here with you this morning, Alan.
Now, I remember your predecessor, Rod Sims, told me he works 7 days a week. And before him, Graham Sammy used to sleep 3 or 4 hours a night or something silly like that. So is it part of the job description to be as head of the ACCC that you have to work all the time?
It is, but the job is worth it. The cause is worth it.
Do you think you'll go for a second term like Rod and Graham did? And Alan Fels before them, actually. I mean, or will 5 years be enough, do you think?
I'm interested, certainly, to extend. I think there are various projects that I'm keen on that are still to be concluded. But of course, it's a decision of the Treasurer.
Tell us about the job and the ACCC's role in general. I mean, are you mostly battling Australia's oligopolies or focusing on trying to protect consumers, or are they the same things?
They are, perfect question, Alan. They are two sides of the same coin. When you have properly informed, actually empowered to engage, confident to engage in the economy consumers, you can have competition on the merits because they're not being misled. And you need a really vibrant, innovative, competitive economy so that there is choice, there is pressure on price so that price comes down, and so that there is actually a drive to meet consumers' needs, which is why it is so important that the ACCC, starting as the Trade Practices Commission 50 years ago, was from the very beginning both a consumer protection regulator and a competition promotion regulator. I have now met competition agencies worldwide, and less than half have both consumer and competition. And I think it is an inherent strength of the Commission that we always know why the promotion of competition is so important, because of the consumer benefits that it delivers. And we are always also focusing on ensuring that consumers are able to confidently engage in our economy.
But do you think competition always protects consumers? I think a lot of the regulation and thinking about government and the regulation of business over the past few decades has been that competition will do the job. It'll keep prices down, it'll protect consumers. But what about the times when it fails?
It's fascinating. If you go back to Adam Smith, so there's this view that firms will compete and will compete in order to meet demand, which should mean that they respond to the needs of consumers who produce demand. There are, however, undoubtedly circumstances in which competition fails. You have natural monopolies, you have areas of our economy where markets are small, and you have persistent oligopolies, as you asked just before, Alan. And in those circumstances, you can need particular regulatory interventions. The ACCC, for example, is the regulator of the wholesale pricing for the NBN, which is a broadband monopoly, fixed monopoly in Australia. So we have areas where we also have specific regulatory powers to seek to give the benefits to our economy and consumers that competition otherwise should bring.
Australia kind of famously has two of everything, 2 supermarkets, 2 airlines. I mean, it's got 4 big banks and 3 phone companies, so there's more than 2 there. But still, they are or look to be oligopolies. Is this an inevitable consequence of Australia being a small market, or were mistakes made in the past that allowed this to happen?
There are various forces at work. There are some areas where the distances that have to be traversed, the fixed costs required for that makes it more likely that we will have duopolies. But there are others, and supermarkets is an example, where decisions made at multiple levels by governments, for instance, decisions about where you can have commercial and shopping spaces, for example, decisions at a local government level can restrict the ability for new entrants to come in. We can have other areas of regulation. So it was a huge benefit of the time after the Hilmer Review, where there was a review done at a Commonwealth and state level of various regulatory structures that in fact created either monopolies or oligopolies. So, for instance, agricultural markets board, single desks to export. There were various ways in which our regulation favoured one or only two or privileged areas of business and of firms, which the regulation itself and the way in which funding itself favoured smaller numbers of competitors. And those areas were addressed very successfully with the Productivity Commission subsequently said an over 2% increase in our GDP as a result of removing those barriers in the basically 1990s up to 2000s in that first National Competition Policy Review. That's why it's very important. Minister Lees very strongly speaks in the Treasurer in favour of this, of the next round that is happening now, the National Competition Review, because mistakes are made. Mistakes have been made in a regulatory sense, seeking to regulate heavily licensed, who can participate, that actually create barriers to competition.
Do you want to tell me what the mistakes were?
I think apart from these regulatory mistakes, there have been situations in which there have been mergers that have created large changes. They've occurred in media. Now, these can be difficult situations. We recently, I can give you, have had a difficult situation. So we were asked to authorise the merger of the last two cash in transit businesses in Australia, who at the time were Armaguard and Prosegur. Prosegur was a global Spanish company. It said it would leave in any event because with the diminishing use of cash in our economy, which has significantly reduced and certainly reduced even further during COVID, there has been less need for cash, which makes cash in fact, the highest cost payment system in Australia. And the key part of that cost is the distribution of cash all around Australia, wherever people are wanting to be able to access cash. And so we were asked to authorise that merger, which was a merger to monopoly. Now, in the face of the likely leaving, and which would have been a very disorderly leaving, without continuity of service, the ACCC did authorise that merger, and we did so on terms that for a 3-year period there was a requirement to continue to provide the services to every part of Australia, including rural and regional areas, with an ability for a small price increase, but not an increase that might be reflective of a monopoly. Those 3 years are soon to expire, and we are looking forward to a regulatory framework which will allow intervention in a situation where competition is not likely to work. So you might say, Alan, was that a mistake? Should we have waited to see how messy that exit would be? But frequently, the Trade Practices Commission and ACCC has been faced with difficult questions. Is competition going to be in any event? Due to the pressures in the market, is it going to result in a situation where there's only one provider or less competition in any event? And that's very hard.
I suppose what I'd say is that as long as you believe Prosegur that they were going to leave, then what the hell, you might as well let them merge. But I mean, what I would ask is, firstly, do you think there's a case in Australia, given the structure of business and industries in Australia, there's a case for breaking any monopolies or duopolies up, as
Mm.
America has done in the past? And secondly, is there a case for returning to the regime that the Whitlam government introduced in 1973, which was the Prices Justification Tribunal, where large companies had to notify and justify price increases before they did them? Now, you've got a bit of that going on, I think, in some cases. I think with supermarkets you now have got it, and I think with energy and
Correct.
water and so on, there's a bit of that. But do you think that there's a case for doing that across the board?
Currently in our merger powers, we do have an ability to seek divestiture from the court.
Yeah, but you
The
don't do it though, do you?
the ACCC has in the past sought in a merger of abattoirs, actually. So there is a power to do so, but that is only if there has been a merger without a notification to the ACCC, and that will no longer occur because from the beginning of this year, we have a mandatory notification regime, and we are seeing at least twice as many of the mergers that are occurring than had previously ever been shown to the ACCC. That has been a very successful intervention and one that is continuing to provide very efficient, timely, and clear certainty about how the process will run. So that has been a significant reform. So we will see them. The courts do have a general discretion to give an ability to give whatever remedy. So, for instance, in a situation where we saw a misuse of market power, we could apply for a range of remedies. I certainly believe an ability to have divestiture in a situation of misuse of market power would be worthwhile having within the set of remedies that would be available to take to court. Those remedies have only been very rarely used in the US, and in fact, were used not with an express power, but just a general court discretion. And yes, we used originally to break up the railway booms of the early part of when antitrust first became an area of real focus for American legislatures and also for private action and action by regulators. And then again, in relation to the telecommunications companies with the big split. But those are the only two interventions. They were certainly in respect of telecommunications an important intervention, Alan. There's no doubt. It would be a worthwhile power to have. How often it would create change, I do not think that it is nearly as effective as this merger reform that the government introduced and that commenced at the beginning of this year. Because prior to this, there was an ability for there to be creeping acquisitions, multiple acquisitions that the ACCC didn't see, which then, in effect, it was very hard to unwind the roll-ups that had occurred. Now that we have this amendment, which requires all mergers and acquisitions over a certain set of thresholds, and the level reduces in terms of the size of the target where the acquirer is a large business, so above 500 million revenue, so that we have much greater assurance that we will see and can stop and therefore can promote competition because we are able to both stop increasing concentration but also allow lower barriers to entry for new entry. I think that is a much more effective remedy and set of powers than to have a divestiture remedy for a few set of examples.
You recently had a big win against Coles over price discounting, where the previous price had been recently raised, and you're now suing Woolworths for the same thing. So I'm just wondering whether this indicates one of the behaviours of oligopolies, which is that they mightn't actively collude and have lunch with each other and cook things up, but they end up doing the same thing and tend to watch and follow each other's pricing.
I think one of the best descriptions that you have here is that when you have only two competitors, they're cozy. It's like they're sitting in the same lounge room and They don't have normal commercial tensions. And we certainly observed, and our supermarket inquiry showed, that the two watch each other closely, price very closely, watch each other's range closely, are not nearly as conscious of or following smaller competitors, particularly the independents, though they do watch Aldi. So it becomes often, it's called synchronized swimming also, for another great sort of Australian analogy, that they move at the same time and in the same cadence. So these are certainly areas of economic outcomes, and the impact on it is much less dynamic when you are looking at such a cosy situation.
Do you think Australians pay more for groceries than they should do? I mean, Coles and Woolies always, when they're defending themselves, they always point to how low their margins are. But do you think their margins should be less? I mean, and when you administer the new regime that was introduced on July the 1st, will you be looking to squeeze their margins?
The critical question in that new set of regulation is, are the margins reasonable? Looking at the costs, or looking at the areas of service. These are all points that we are going to look to. Certainly in our inquiry, we found that Coles and Woolworths sit amongst the top bracket of profitable supermarket businesses in the world. So that is one indication that there is value in scrutinising here. What we are going to do is choose a set of key focus products influenced by where prices are particularly high, influenced by consumer reports to us, influenced by what we can see in terms of dispersion of margins, for example. And then we will particularly focus in periods of times on those products. And we will also be giving public reports about what we're doing, because one of the key aspects that we also find is that the ability of monitoring and casting a light, shining a light, is an important part also of accountability. And through that transparency, that consumers can know what their choices are, and also the businesses know they're being accountable. An example, interestingly, in terms of showing, going back to our point about the two sides of the same coin, a number of our important cases arise from consumer reports to us, either directly to us. So in the last financial year, we have received over 125,000 consumer reports to our information centre, our info centre. We also, though, look quite broadly. So we look for intelligence ourselves from market inquiries that we do, from other inquiries that we are undertaking. For instance, we learn during merger assessments, for example. But in addition, we look at social media. So when you look at the case and the issue relating to the represented price discounts, where we said that the price that was used as the reference price was not a genuine price, in that situation, we had received complaints over many years from thousands of consumers actually relating to pricing, but we also had seen on Reddit, Instagram and Facebook a lot of discussion about concerns about pricing. So we get input from a number of areas in order to determine which other cases we should investigate. We do take into account the harm that there will be and the detriment on the economy and on consumers. And it's interesting, in another important consumer protection case, which related to the coverage conduct by Bupa, the health insurer. And in that situation, where there was a mixed coverage claim, if you were, so because your treatment required more than one procedure, for example, or more than one treatment, if you had cover for one and not cover for another, for a period of time, Bupa was refusing cover altogether. Multiple consumers were affected. That case came to our attention through just one consumer's complaint. So I don't want to represent it requires a lot of complaints. We take account of what we receive and the detriment and harm it can cause, how significant this service is in the economy when we decide what to investigate and then to take action for. In that case, Bupa did admit both misleading and deceptive conduct, and in a certain respect of their system was unconscionable. And they not only paid a penalty, they remediated the patients and also doctors who had been unable to treat some patients. So it's, I think, an interesting point to be able to show how engaged we are as an economy-wide regulator and how important what consumers tell us assists us in protecting both consumers and also competition.
Well, that was a very full and detailed answer, but you didn't exactly answer the question. Do you think we pay more for groceries from Coles and Woolworths than we should? And are you interested in reducing their margins?
The fact that they're in a very high bracket of profitability says globally does say that there is a question to be asked whether it's too high. In our inquiry, we did not establish at that time that the margins were too high, and we now have a power, and we will need to look at focused products and look to that question. But Alan, as you always do, it's your trademark. You are always very engaged in what the data is. We have not yet received we've not yet established the data that says the margins are too high. And it's always important as a regulator to be evidence-based.
Just on another matter then, the war in the Persian Gulf not only increased the price of oil, but and then reduced it, and now it's increased it again. But it's also led to a big increase in refinery margins. So the refineries are suddenly making tons of money. Then the local refiners, two of them, say that they're just using imported pricing. But is someone profiteering here? I mean, is there some price gouging going on somewhere? And where they're using the closure of the Strait of Hormuz to do it?
This is a question that we are looking at closely, and we did have a meeting with our Fuel Consultative Committee where we asked questions in relation to this. It's been a highly volatile time. It's continuing to be a highly volatile time. In that time, risks have sat at various levels of the supply chain. The refiners will say that there are periods of time when margins are low and then periods of time when margins are higher, and that is cyclical, and they need to recover sufficient margin across the whole cycle in order to keep reinvesting in complex technology. We are alert to this point about the increased refinery margins at this time, and we are looking at that question.
I mean, in general, with fuel pricing, can anything be done about the price cycles? I mean, why can't we have stable prices for petrol and diesel? Why do they have to go up and down all the time?
A very interesting factor and concerning factor. Certainly, consumers do not like price cycles, particularly because you cannot always manage your fuel consumption to buy when you're at the bottom of the cycle rather than at the top of the cycle. In Australia, we have cycles on the East Coast in Perth, not in the smaller capital cities, so not in Canberra, Darwin, Hobart, for example. The ACCC did some time ago commence court proceedings to test whether there was, in effect, price signalling happening through the way in which prices would be increased to signal when to increase and to then stay up. And actually, there was a lot of very interesting evidence put on, including evidence in effect that price cycles can just be normal parts of the way, given the structure of particular markets that it operates, or that price cycles, in effect, relied upon concerted practices and exchange of information. Ultimately, the case did not finally go to court, because the ACCC settled it on the basis of ensuring that all consumers got very rapidly updated. So through the petrol price apps that we are all now able to have that allow you to choose where is the best price. And certainly in major capital cities, at any time within a reasonable driving range, there will be a much lower priced, times 20 cents or more lower, a much lower priced petrol supply than the highest price.
Okay, just moving now on to digital, the digital world. The ACCC conducted a 5-year digital platform services inquiry and reported more than a year ago now recommendations to the government for amendments and heavier penalties. Government accepted the recommendations, but I don't think anything's happened, has it? Well, I mean, how's it going? Is anything happening?
This is a really important area of our work, really important across the economy and for consumers, because increasingly the vast proportion of transactions are occurring in the digital space. The ACCC recommended a number of policy recommendations. 2 of them have already been put into place. One is the scams protection framework, because the harms from scams, particularly in the digital environment. And the second, which we really welcome, 2 weeks ago, the Commonwealth Parliament passed the Unfair Trading Practices Amendment, which prohibits unfair trading practices, whether they're in a digital space or bricks and mortar, actually, unfair trading practices that cause harm to consumers. However, we also very strongly recommended that there should be a digital competition measures legislative framework that would enable only the very largest critical intermediary digital platforms, for example, Apple and Google, in relation to their mobile operating systems, that those could be designated by the minister, and then they could have specific targeted code obligations to allow interoperability and contestability, so that other competitors, so that we could buy apps not solely through the App Store, we could make payments not solely through the payment mechanism in the App Store, which can cost anywhere up to 30 cents in the dollar. Every time you make an in-app payment, there is a clipping of the ticket. So the government has in principle supported it. The ACCC is working closely with Treasury relating to the development of such framework, and we are keenly looking forward to that being able to be brought into the law. That sort of specific regulation to only in relation to targeted specific areas and services is in place in Europe, it's in place in the UK. The Japanese have done it. So in our Asia Pacific region, the Japanese have done this in relation to the mobile operating systems. And we do think that Australian businesses and Australian consumers will benefit from increased competition, given how critical the platforms are in relation to the underpinning of what is now a predominantly digital economy.
Yeah, well, so you mentioned Apple and Google's 30 cents to the dollar, 30% commissions basically they're charging. Now,
Yes.
don't you think that, I mean, that's a whopping commission. It's the largest, it's the biggest commission I can think of anywhere. Don't you think that's prima facie evidence of excessive market power?
We do. Absolutely. And it's why we have recommended that we do need a particular intervention, because this is an area where competition isn't working, and competition isn't working because, so it's a very important question, Alan. What are the features of this market power? So firstly, very high market share. The ability to set up barriers to consumers to churn. You don't want to leave. You hold a lot of data with them. You hold all your photos with them. You have a whole set of, as consumers, barriers to switching, even if you were wanting to switch. In addition, the data assets that they hold are so significant. So they not only understand consumers, the businesses that are on the platforms in order to sell, they see the data in terms of how those businesses, and those businesses may be operating services and apps that are competitive with the platform itself. They understand what is differentiating what the changes are of competing businesses. So when you put together those network effects, the barriers to new entry or barriers to expansion, and this incredible addition of the control of incredibly granular, sophisticated data, which in essence knows you and me, what we search for and what we purchase better than we know ourselves, frankly. If you were to think about that, when you think about a digital twin, the platforms have digital twins of us all.
I mean, in general, I wonder whether do you think that the regulators, governments, got caught short by the rapid development of digital platforms and how quickly they became very powerful? And does that now inform your thinking about AI? Because obviously it's now developing very rapidly, and I wonder to what extent that's going to be a challenge for regulators. And in particular, I'm thinking, it looks like a duopoly starting to develop between Claude and ChatGPT. I mean, how are you thinking about that?
The first part of the question, Alan, which is an important one, which is, did the regulators and government miss how rapidly and how significantly this was developing? The record says yes. And in fact, in the US, the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission have tried now to go back to raise cases, for instance, in terms of the bringing together of within Meta of Instagram, WhatsApp, and Facebook. So all that social media coming together. And there was previously a thought, well, if you had a social media service, that's different than a messaging service. It's different than a photo sharing service. But actually, each have been used to communicate, each have been used to bring groups together, and each are used for messaging, and each, of course, have significant areas of data which reinforce each other. And there was a narrower view about what was the definition of the market, and therefore whether there was a potential competition concern. So these are all questions that are very important. And yes, the consequences and the potential consequences were missed. In terms of AI, it is such a significantly, rapidly developing area. Just looking at the transactions that are taking place and the partnerships and alliances that are taking place are significantly reshaping markets. The competition regulatory measures that we had recommended would enable an ability to ensure that despite the concentration and the market power coming together in the stack, that you would be able to continue to have competition. So that and competitive contestability and interoperability. We also do think that the powers that we have, for instance, under the Australian consumer law, have the right structure and the right principles, which is that if you and I get a service and we're advised by a chatbot, for example, and the chatbot misadvises us that the party who we should seek redress from is a supplier who has put that chatbot in front of us to communicate about its business, that we don't have to claim all the way up to whether the AI supplier made some errors. So that principle, which is currently in the consumer law, the consumer guarantee rights, we get from the supplier who we dealt with, and that they have back-to-back of the supply chain their ability to get a remedy if it was due to a fault in the service that they acquired. Now, we think those principles are right. We think that consumers should not have to find in a totally opaque AI-enhanced supply chain where the error occurred. The consumer deals with and gets a remedy from the party who's applied to the consumer. We just need to make sure that there are clarification in definitions so that, because this is an old act, it's an act that inserted consumer guarantee rights decades ago. And in that time, there were goods and there were services. AI could enhance the good now. AI could be the service or could enhance a service. Where does AI sit in those definitions? So we do think there needs to be some careful clarification to ensure that, particularly for the remedies that suppliers want to take up the supply chain that AI is properly caught. So there's important thinking to be done. And you are right, it is all changing in the blink of our eyes.
Yeah, well, I mean, it feels a bit like governments and regulators are inherently too slow. There's no way that you can keep up. And also, I wonder, these companies are so big now, they're measured in the trillions of dollars. Both, the Microsofts and Google and Apple and so on, but also the new ones. Are you ever going to be able to find them enough so that they don't see the regulation and fines as just the cost of doing business because they're going to be so small? Are you ever going to be able to really hit them hard enough?
Much of what you're saying there, Alan, is exactly our most important point that we are seeking to make. The government has significantly increased the penalties. It moved from 10 million to 50 million to 100 million per contravention. So there's a significant increase that is occurring there. And that is, you can have multiple contraventions in a course of conduct. And it also looks at 3 times the benefit, a third of and 30% of the revenue that is made in the period of contravention. So there is a significant increase in penalties. I think what is important, though, is we must get, and we know that we need to show in our cases, because judges are the ones who decide penalties, and we will need to establish to the judges to shift an understanding and consideration of the question of what are truly deterrent, because penalties seek to deter. They seek to deter not only the specific party who the court has found contravened, but also they seek to provide general deterrence so that all businesses, including very large businesses, sit up and take seriously complying with the law. But in addition, there are other remedies that we can get, including orders to prohibit that conduct, orders to provide recompense to consumers. So there is a whole set of tools and remedies that we can get, but a fundamental principle that is at the core of what pecuniary penalties are supposed to achieve, which is deterrence, is that it cannot be so low as to be a cost of doing business.
We'll have to leave it there. Thanks very much, Gina Cass-Gottlieb. It's been great.
It's been a real pleasure. I've appreciated all the really testing and interesting questions, Alan. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for joining me on That's Business. You can find That's Business in the ABC Business Daily feed every Friday. And so you don't miss out, make sure you follow ABC Business Daily on ABC Listen or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like it, please tell your friends about it. The ABC Business Daily team will be back in the feed on Monday.